ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of the Hitting the Field podcast. And today it is the second to last Dance recap podcast with two of HTF's best and brightest basketball minds. We have Mr. Basketball himself, Ross Bernstein, on the pod today. Ross, how are you today, my friend?
Good day. Always a good day to talk some basketball. Something to talk about. Second to last episode. You know, it's sad it's coming to an end next week, but these last two episodes were it's probably the two best that have come out so far, so I'm really excited.
And Okelo Pena, welcome to the Last Dance pod. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Jeremy. I've been itching to talk about this for a while. I'm glad I found some free time today to talk about this, especially knowing that this is one of the last two. So I'm disappointed it's coming to an end, but I'm happy that I'm able to come on and talk about, an episode last night that left me speechless.
Yeah, so let's move forward. So last night's episodes were mostly about him leaving the game and then him returning to the game, and it was nice that those two episodes kind of were played back to back because it kind of told one story in itself despite it being in two parts. So let's start. So we left off last week where he wins championship number 3, and I think there's a lot of at least before this episode there were a lot of misconceptions as to whether why Michael left the game when he did. People thought it had to do because of his father, but it turns out because of his father's passing. But it turns out that it was before then. He had even was thinking about retiring. In fact, they were talking about it as early as the '92 Olympics. So, look, it's hard to you're at the top of your game. You're only 10 seasons into your career, pretty much 9 seasons into your career. You've won 3 championships. You're still the greatest player in the league, and it isn't really that close. And you walk away from the game. Ross, what did you make of Michael Jordan's first retirement, and what did you maybe learn last night that you didn't know beforehand about it?
Yeah, the biggest takeaway from that I learned was definitely that he already knew a year prior. Like most people, I just assumed after his father's passing, he wanted to follow in his what his father wanted for him, which was to play baseball at some point. So to learn that he already knew that a year prior was really amazing. But it just goes to show just how sick of the media he was and just how sick of the attention he was. And it seemed like basketball was just getting kind of boring for him. He was dominating the sport at every level. He accomplished anything you wanted to accomplish. All he needed to do was get the third. Because he said, Magic, Bird, they didn't get a third. So I need to get that third, and then I'm good. And I think at that point, he couldn't see past that third championship. I think he's like, I'm dominating every single aspect of this. I only need 3 to prove I'm the greatest of all time. Which was arguably true. If he never came back at those second 3, he'd still probably be in the conversation for one of the greatest runs of all time by any player in the NBA. So I just think it was the combination of just sick of the media. He was mentally and physically exhausted. And obviously, I think he just wanted a new challenge, which came in baseball.
Yeah, so, Okelo, you put yourself, just, look, you're at the top of your game, and you're the best at something. Would you leave and walk away from that knowing that you were the best at something? Like, what do you think that says? Or would you try to have stretch out your peak as long as possible? Because I mean, arguably, if Michael Jordan, doesn't retire in '93, they're contenders again in '94, to contenders again in '95. So what do you think? Do you think Michael Jordan made the right decision?
I think he did personally, pointing off to Ross with what he said, of course, dealing with all that he's done and accomplishing the best. And I also look at it as when it's time to walk away from the game, when it's time to walk away. You've done, if not the best, and I think personally, if he had continued on, maybe for those couple of years down the stretch, maybe there's something to the light where you don't give your absolute best and that your body starts to run down. And, you don't want people to say, well, only he was good up until that certain point. So I think when you leave, especially at that time, I kind of compare it to like for example, bringing in a little bit of sports history, like Jim Brown and Barry Sanders, when they left at their peak, they left so much to the imagination in terms of their retiring early and leaving at least something to say, I remember at this and he did it for those years and it was excellent. I think MJ did the right thing, especially going through the process of all that he had dealt with, not only with the losing of his dad and the Olympics and the 3 titles and, of course, the gambling problems from the bad press. I think MJ made the right decision, and he did it on his terms, Jeremy, and you got to respect that, especially to a guy that accomplished a lot in such a somewhat short time at that first retirement.
Yeah, so I mean, you look at 3 championships and the amount of stress that he had to undergo, especially during that final season where all these gambling issues started. The media started using that as a way to bring him down. And even when he retired, people questioned that motive and they thought, that they were using that as kind of a way to explain the retirement. Do you think that was particularly fair, Ross? And why do you think the media and Michael's critics would go as low as to say that he was part of his father's murder?
At that point, I just think the media was just reaching for anything. When you're the biggest superstar in the world at that point, they're going to try to make a story out of anything, and they just found very loose connections that I guess anybody could have tried to have made, and just they ran with the story. There was obviously no backing, no evidence, nothing ever came out of it. There was no reason to really believe it, but if you take these loose connections saying, well, he's a gambling addict, he just retired, his father died, is this a coincidence? Like if you give that in the press, you could get in some people's minds, oh, this could have happened, when at the end of the day, there was never any evidence to prove it, and like the prosecutors were talking about, it just was an accident that could have happened to any single person. It just so happens that it happened to Michael Jordan's father, which is a complete tragedy.
Yeah, okay, look, Ross and I discussed this with China last week about how when you're on top of something, when you're the best at something, that people just won't just accept it, and they want to do anything they can to tear you down and to take you off your pedestal. Do you think that's particular? What are your thoughts about that and people not just celebrating greatness, but rather trying to attack it?
I think it's an insult, personally, Jeremy. I mean, you look at, accomplishing and being the best at something. But, I mean, I look at it as just even as well, it's life. People are going to take shots at you. They're going to like you for all the great stuff that you're doing, and they're going to find a way to dislike you. I think it's just the price that you pay for fame sometimes, and just trying to be the absolute best at everything. I think personally it was wrong for the media to try to take shots. But then again, you look at just even that time in the 90s and how that kind of dirty media was kind of like sort of spreading a little bit. So I just look at it from the aspect of, anybody, when they see you on top, they always want to try to bring you down. They always want to try to try to make you, feel worth bad and try to knock you off your pedestal. But I think it's just how you fight and overcome those adversities that truly define it. And, MJ fought his critics hard, good and bad, even before he didn't win 3 titles in that early stint. So it's just always a fight that you have when you're the best and at least noticeable in the public eye.
So here's my question. Now I know my answer, but I'm curious to see where you two stand on this. If Michael Jordan stays on board in 1994, given all of the all of the pressure that he had to face, are the Bulls hoisting the Larry O'Brien Trophy in 1994? Yes or no?
Ooh,
man, that's a tough question.
That's really hard because you have to take into a lot. Michael Jordan didn't lose, but I'm just gonna go with. I'm going to go with no. I just think he was too physically and mentally exhausted. I don't think his mind was there. I think what made Michael Jordan such a great player and competitor was he was always on 100%. He was always going to give 100% no matter what, and he just had that drive that almost nobody has ever had in the history of sports. I think once his father passed, I just think it just took a lot out of him that he just wasn't ready to recover at the time. It took baseball and it took just a little relief to get him there. That got him to a second repeat.
I'm going to agree with Ross. I just don't see it happening, not only from the aspect of MJ being drained and stuff, but I even look at those teams, especially around that time, that were coming not only in the Eastern Conference, but the West. I felt like the Knicks could have potentially creeped up there. I mean, obviously, when MJ left, the Knicks went to the finals. They could have maybe eliminated the Bulls with MJ. That could have maybe given more weight to the rivalry, especially that time. Of course, you even had in the West not only the Suns, but the Jazz and, of course, the Rockets, Hakeem Olajuwon and company that were creeping up there. I think it would have been hard-pressed for the Bulls to win 4 straight, and it's very rare, especially in the NBA, for a team to win 4 straight titles. So I couldn't have seen it happening. The closest I would have saw was maybe an Eastern Conference final loss, or at least a second-round loss to the Knicks.
Yeah, that Knicks team, eventually, the team that they met in '93 would go to the finals in '94. They'd lose to Houston, which is why I said I know where I stand on this. And that '94 Rockets team, one of the best teams ever assembled, I feel like, and a team that doesn't get a whole lot of love because they're sandwiched into the Bulls three-peats in the '90s. So, so we look, and I think that ultimately you look at how hard it is to win 2 championships, and how much harder it is not just to win 2 championships, but to win 3 championships. And to see all of the toll that it's taken on Michael Jordan, especially in that 3rd season of each three-peat, the '93 season and the '98 season, which we'll talk a little bit more about as they get their early playoff run in '98. I don't think we're ever going to see a team win 3 championships again. I really don't. Just because the competition also is much more spread out now than it used to be. So I don't think we're ever going to see a team win 3 championships ever again. If the Golden State Warriors with Kevin Durant couldn't win 3 championships, I don't think anybody will ever win 3 championships again. And it's another reason why Michael Jordan is considered to be one of the greatest of all time, if not the greatest of all time. So in 1994, with life away from basketball, Michael Jordan decides to pick up baseball. And, I think, you look at Michael Jordan's baseball career, and they kind of use it as like a footnote, like, oh, this was, he wasn't that good at baseball, and, he was in the minor leagues. But last night on the episode, that first episode, that wasn't how he was portrayed. He was portrayed as someone who, despite not having baseball as his primary sport, Okelo, he was a pretty decent, given the circumstances, a pretty decent ball player that Jerry Reinsdorf says could have made the major league someday if he really stayed at it.
No, I think even Terry Francona, who was the manager at the time for the Birmingham Barons, and of course he's a World Series champion manager with the Red Sox, and of course he's led the Cleveland Indians. I think compared to the documentary Jordan Rides the Bus as well, I think this was a much better portrayal. I mean, he had, a 13-win hitting streak, if I'm not mistaken, before he went cold. Yeah. He was progressing and stuff. I think Jordan enjoyed the challenge to compete well, and especially to move from one sport to another. I think even they didn't even mention this in the documentary, but even you look at that time in baseball, I mean, you had multi-sport athletes like Deion Sanders, who played football and baseball, Bo Jackson as well. And I think Jordan enjoyed the challenge, and you could see something progressively that he could have been something. I definitely felt like, compared to what I initially knew about like his batting average and stuff and how it was jokes around, he could have potentially been something great had it not been for the lockout. I really would have loved to imagine seeing, Michael Jordan in Comiskey Park, 3-2, bases loaded at the bottom of the 9th, and out comes MJ to plate to get the game-winning home run. I would have loved to see that. I think he could have been pretty damn close if he had continued, the hard work that he was progressing in.
Right, and, Ross, there was, he finished the season batting .202, which very impressive for someone who, they talked about, they would have started Michael Jordan in A-ball if they could, but they couldn't because of the media circus that their A-ball team could not withhold. So they moved him to Double-A because he was Michael Jordan, and he wasn't supposed to be playing 200. He wasn't supposed to be batting 200 at that level, but nonetheless, he persevered as the competitor and the athlete that he is.
Yeah, no, I think Michael Jordan is just one of those cases where it's simply there's just some freak athletes that have existed in our time that no matter what sport they picked, they would have been probably great at. I'm a firm believer that if LeBron decided as a kid, like, hey, I'm going to be a football player, he'd be one of the best tight ends who have ever done it. I know there's no backing to that. I just believe there's certain athletes that no matter what they put their mind to with that work ethic and with that natural athleticism, they would have been great. And I think it's crazy that he essentially was just someone that played in high school. They said he didn't play for 14 years. From 17 to 31, didn't touch a baseball probably. Maybe once in a while threw it around with his kids, but besides that, he didn't really play. That's like if I just walked onto any really high school team to pick a senior. It's like, yeah, you cannot play for 14 years. And at 31, I'm 30 in AA, which is as competitive as you can get. It's like, from what my roommate told me, I'm not really into baseball. He says that's comparison to playing overseas in Korea. It's about the same level of competition, which is not easy at all.
Oh, yeah.
And to bat 202 after not playing baseball for 14 years and also putting a massive toll on your body playing in the NBA for over 8-9 years, it's nothing short of impossible. I don't know how he did it. It just goes to show that his work ethic was it was unmatched, and the fact that you just don't want to lose and you don't want to embarrass yourself, it took him all the way to where if he really stuck at it, he probably would have been in the MLB one day. He might not have been a superstar. Might not have been one of the greats in baseball, but he would have probably got a shot in professional baseball.
Yeah, and there was talks about how he might have stayed with it if circumstances didn't change the effects of the league. So in 1994 is an infamous year in baseball history because it is the year of the lockout. It's the first year really ever. It's funny we're talking about, cancellation of play in 2020. 1994, they could not come to an agreement on the collective bargaining agreement. So they went into a work stoppage in the middle of the year and ultimately canceled their postseason. And what that did was it forced... And that work stoppage, it's one of the longest work stoppages in sports history. The 05 lockout within the NHL comes up, but the 94-95 lockout for baseball lasted from about August till March. And then, there was talks of even bringing replacement players into opening day, and Michael Jordan would have qualified as one of those replacement players. But I think out of respect for, the major leaguers, especially that White Sox team who was in contention for a title only, in 1993, he ultimately opted not to. And then that's when he started going back to Bulls practice. And it was amazing to me to see how quickly it was for Michael Jordan to go to Bulls practice and immediately say, I'm back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, Lo, how crazy is it for, someone in a playoff stretch? Basically, he decided, there were what, 15 or so games left in this season. What if it was what if someone said, you know what, I'm going to come back. I'm going to have, the greatest player in the league, say, hey, I'm going to come back. It's like saying Kobe. Kobe, let's just say, Kobe just says, let's pretend nothing in the last, couple months has happened. But let's just say, Kobe comes with LeBron, he's like, hey, I'm coming back. How would that be? How would that, Kobe joins LeBron and Anthony Davis and all those Lakers, and what do you think that would be like in today's game?
I think personally a lot of people would be shocked. Of course, you would have skepticism, especially because, Kobe had been away from the league for over 3.5 years, going to go on 4. So there are a lot of question marks, especially maybe within the locker room. Well, you've been away from the game. Could you still perform at a high level and be the same Kobe Bryant that we had known for a couple of years? But I look at it as well, not only from a publicity standpoint, that it, reinvigorates a lot of eyeballs, especially in today's world of social media, but maybe it gives, other teams a potential scare, oh no, Kobe Bryant, Anthony Davis, LeBron James, are the revival of this, could this be the big 3, ever to assemble? For Michael Jordan, when he came back, I'm sure, like, even though it was 15 games in the season, I mean, the Bulls, still were in the playoff hunt, even though they weren't like where they were in a couple years and even the season prior. But, I think just the name itself, it just still scares people, especially, the competitor that he is. And, he's going to find a way, some way to kick your butt and, put the team on his back and go out there and, give a good scare. To me, I think it's a good boost for locker room, especially when you know that the sheriff is back in town, and for other teams and stuff, they might have question marks, but somehow, some way, it may not be that first game, it may not be that third game, but somehow, some way, he's going to find his groove, and it's going to be hell to pay for a lot of teams if they ever doubt him.
Yeah, I mean, like Ross, like I'm trying to find ways to compare what Michael Jordan did to like anything, and it's interesting because I've tried to use a lot of comparisons lately, but I often find myself trying to compare myself to Michael Jordan, which is kind of crazy. But I mean, were you shocked at how quickly the development was from him not even being on a practice court to just coming back, and then not just coming back, but then less than a week later dropped 55 in Madison Square Garden?
Nothing about Jordan really shocks me. The fact that although he technically retired, it wasn't a real retired. It wasn't like he was 39. He was still in his prime athletic condition. And as an athlete, even though he said he was training his body for baseball, it wasn't a basketball body. It's still in there, that muscle memory. It wasn't super surprising that he came back and dominated as quick as he did, just because he was the best player in the world by far at the time, and he was still 32, 33, around that age. He was not an old guy by any means when he came back. Obviously, he had a little rust coming in and all that, but I think playing at Madison Square Garden was such a big moment for him. And I think in those games, he shows up no matter what. I don't really think it matters what circumstances. At the end of the day, you're going to get a bucket. You're a baller. You play basketball. You do what you do. And I think the fact that he was able to come back this quickly, although it was impressive, it wasn't the most surprising. I think at the end of the day, you're the greatest basketball player of all time. You do those things. You do the impossible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is no question. Michael Jordan, to me, it's like there's just another gear. It's like he's like some robot or something, or he's inhuman, for him to do these type of things. And I think that's what makes him more spectacular than any athlete in any sport, and especially to come back from something that you've been away for a long time and still find a way to be dominant even in a different condition, because he did have a baseball body. That just screams volumes. And I think for anybody, it's just a testament to how greatness is personified.
Yeah, I think that it was just crazy to see how he was just so quick to get to like right there, but ultimately it hurt him in the end. It was just a flash in the pan, because then in the playoffs they ran into that Magic team, that a very young Magic team that was probably, other than any of those Bulls teams, the most talented team in that era. I truly believe that team was built to last. And I think if Shaq stays and if Penny stays healthy, that Orlando team could make some noise during that second three-peat, especially during 1998, where I feel like the Bulls were at their weakest point. So, but I think one of the coolest things to come out of last night's episode was the whole when Nick Anderson said 45 isn't 23, and then the very next game he wears 23.
Yeah. That I love that story every time that they bring that up, and especially with the Concord sneaker as well, Jeremy, that it had the 45 on it as well. It always just like makes me chuckle and makes me happy a little bit whenever Michael Jordan just needs something for him to tick in order for him to get at him, and and especially the following game dropping 23 and then showing up on Nick Anderson. That's classic, MJ, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at that conference semifinal series. It's the last playoff series Michael Jordan ever lost. How much? And there were Tim Grover, I believe his name is, his personal trainer, was talking about how he usually takes a bit of a break in between the end of the season and the off season, but the break didn't last very long, Ross. It was maybe about 24 hours.
Yeah. Nah, he was ready to refocus. No one hates losing more, I think, in history than Michael Jordan. I think he knew he wasn't at his 100, so I think it ate away at him that people thought that was his 100, and that was Michael Jordan. Like they said in the documentary at one point, it's official, guys. Michael Jordan is human, which I think he took offense to that because he knows he's not human. He's the greatest basketball player of all time and dominated some of the greatest, others the greatest to do it. And I just think it resharpened. He just had to resharpen his mind and his body because prior to that, to returning, he had the three-peat. It was unquestionable that he was the best in the world. And I think any doubt, he just needed any little nudge, any little doubt on his abilities just to take it to the next level. Because he could drop 30 on you with almost not trying and not be motivated. It's just in the course of action, I'm going to do it because I'm just this great. But once you give him that motivation and that edge, he becomes unstoppable. Like they said, he just turns it on. There's nothing you could do about it. So I just think he was ready to prove to the world, like, hey, I know I took 2 years off. I gave Houston 2 good championships. Congrats to the king. Clap, clap, clap. But let me show you who the king is. Let me show you how I do this. I'm going to come back. I'm going to train on set of Space Jam. I don't care what it takes. I'm going to show the world that I'm still the greatest to ever do this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It gave you chills. It had to give you chills.
Okay.
No, my biggest question is though, with the training and stuff, when Ross brought up when he was training for Space Jam, because you look back at some of like the players who were on it. I know like to tear off a little bit, but like how come Reggie Miller and Dennis Rodman? I felt like that would have been more entertaining. Like yes, add Patrick Ewing and Charles Barkley, but like Muggsy Bogues, Sean Bradley. Like if you put in like Dennis Rodman and Reggie Miller, I felt like that would have been more entertainment value.
Oh, for sure. I think the Sean Bradley pick did not. It probably was the worst aging one from Space Jam because there's probably kids that have
They needed a center. They needed a center.
Who Sean Bradley is. They needed a center. You're right. Okay, they needed a center. I'm sure they couldn't have got anyone else. I think Dennis Rodman.
They did have Patrick Ewing though. They did have Patrick Ewing.
They did have Patrick Ewing. You're right. But no, I just think Jordan was just trying to scout. I think he just brought people there for the entertainment. What they thought was entertainment, just to hang out and shoot some moves. But I think Jordan was really picking apart these new guys he's never really seen before. He hadn't really seen Reggie Miller, that version of Reggie Miller since he came back to the league. He's like, let me see what this guy's about. I'm probably going to have to face him, which obviously they did, and we all kind of know. Even though they didn't show that, that's kind of the cliffhanger of episode 8. We all know what's going to happen. Obviously.
So,
absolutely.
If you had, so now that Space Jam, so I think the coolest thing about the whole Space Jam thing was the fact that all of those players came to play the pickup games at the end of filming days, and Reggie Miller said it's some of the greatest games he's ever played, and to me that was just that was maybe the coolest part of the episodes last night, was seeing those pickup games take place, and kind of like the Monte Carlo practice where you would love to put your hands on that kind of footage. You would want to, these pickup games. I asked Ross last week how much he would put on a price on the Monte Carlo games. Okay, well, I'm going to ask you this week. Put a price tag. How much money would you pay to be a fly on the wall for those pickup games, the Space Jam pickup games?
Seeing especially all-stars and elite guys on that one. If I was a rich man, Jeremy, give me at least something close to $500,000, maybe close to.
Whoa!
I mean, like you're never gonna get an opportunity like that to see something like that. And trust me, to see, I would love to see, especially like maybe if Dennis Rodman did anything dirty, or maybe did something like an incredible like rebound, something where he's just stretching over. You got to pay me something big, because especially all-stars, elite guys in their prime, facing it off against the greatest player, and especially guys who we could even consider great, like a Reggie Miller, like a Patrick Ewing, a Charles Barkley. I'd pay me big money to do that. I don't even care if it's a pickup game. That's something that, I feel like would put the butts in seats for anything, and it doesn't even have to involve a trophy.
I mean, that's a lot. It's like, but I mean, kind of what we were talking about last week was the Monte Carlo practice is kind of like an all-star game, and similarly, this kind of was as well. there was just that, but it's also, yeah, it's raw. They call their own fouls. It's not something you're ever really gonna see ever again. So yeah, I mean, I think it is valuable. I think $500,000 is a bit much, considering probably the three of us together have earned nowhere near that kind of money. All three of us put together in our lifetime, but.
Sure.
Yeah, it would have to be a decent price tag, but I mean, he used that off season and all of the in the loss to Orlando, and his father's death, and he channeled all of that into that '96 season, and I think that's why that '96 season was the 72 win season. They had so many. They had literally no reason to not do what they did, and sometimes you need to sometimes you need to lose so you can be knocked down a peg, so that you can appreciate and see what you're actually fighting for. You need to lose so that you can understand what you're fighting for. Would you agree with that, Ross?
Can you repeat that question? You said you have to lose to understand what you're fighting for.
Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
how that losing helps create.
Yeah. It
more
creates a monster in you when you're Michael Jordan. It pisses you off. There's nothing worse than an angry Michael Jordan. And when you just win for so long, like, it's probably one of the reasons he went to baseball. He just got bored, right? It just didn't seem like a challenge. You just go through the motions, and you're going to end up winning this thing because you're just that much better. But losing and just the sense of doubt from the media is just, it just weighs over you. Because every day you're going to hear from every single person you walk through, oh, maybe he doesn't have it anymore. Maybe he's not as great as we thought he was. Maybe he doesn't even compare to a Magic or a Bird, which, if you know Michael, that could piss you off more than anything, just because he wanted to be known as the greatest, not as the second or third greatest behind these guys, but as the greatest to ever do it. And I just think the loss it just started the fire. It just reignited the fire, really. It obviously losing his father it just devastated him, and he just didn't seem like he had the passion anymore to just play basketball. Like he said, he wanted his last game to be in front of his father, right? It's what he was greatest at. And what made his father proudest was watching him be the greatest in the world. And after losing his father, he just didn't have it anymore. He had to go to baseball and have that camaraderie with those teammates. And just at the end of the day, he just played for that baseball team. He wasn't really Michael Jordan anymore as a basketball player. He became, like you said, one of the guys. It's what he needed more than anything. But at the end of the day, basketball drew back to him just because I think he truly loved that sport. And once he got not over his father's death, but slowly recovered from it, he just had to go back and give it his all. And after losing, I just think he was like, you know what? I know I lost my father, but what would he want me to do? Get back and just destroy all these guys, which is what he ended up doing.
Yeah, I mean, Okelo, would you think that losing in 90 and not having 94 and losing 95 helped prompt another three-peat, and that maybe if he had continued, that might not have necessarily happened? Do you think that him taking a break from 94 to 95 helped?
Yeah, I think it did, Jeremy, because you go through so much exhaustion, and for athletes you need at least like some form of a break in order to reattain that greatness that you have. Especially going through so much that you put your body through, as well as the emotional and physical toll from, dealing with so much of media attention, critics, and of course the stuff that goes beyond basketball. That definitely, I think, lit a fire under MJ, not only in the terms of when he came back and, needing that fuel as well, losing that magic to the playoffs, but I think just finding that love, because I think we all go through at least at some point to where, we love something, but, maybe we're just emotionally, drained from giving it our all. And maybe, that love isn't just there anymore. So I think, when we get that break, it definitely, brings something more to the table. It makes us look at life so much differently and, makes us reacquaint that love again. And I think when MJ got that drive back, there was no stopping him on that three-peat. I think it was, if not the best thing that, happened to him in that short amount of time. And, that's what led to one of the most dominant eras in Bulls basketball history in the early and the last part of the 90s.
Yeah. So we have so many, we have so many memories from that, that first run that has been talked about, and now, the second run. I don't think you can have, but I think that middle part is probably the most important part of this run because, like you mentioned, like that first three-peat would not have happened if it weren't for those early 90s, the 1990 loss to the Pistons, the 1989 loss to the Pistons, and I don't think you have that if Michael Jordan doesn't step away from the game. And I think that having that, especially that the third year blew him out, and you see that in 1998. At 1998, again, Michael Jordan is at his limit, and you see that he's trying to go on this last stretch of the Last Dance, where he's working towards his final win, and you see that with they breeze by the Nets despite a little bit of trouble maybe in game one, and then the Hornets a little bit of trouble in game two, but ultimately they've prevailed. But it kind of teases us a little bit to the Pacer series, which is where the episode ends with in episode 7. What do you guys think about? So like this Pacer series is more about what we're going to talk about next week. But let me switch gears here a little bit. I'm trying to regroup my thoughts here. But we the episode ends really in two places. Obviously, in the '98 season, where the Pacers in the '98 season wasn't really much of the subject of yesterday's episodes. But you look at but it was more about the fall and the rise again. And it ended with that Sonics series, the '96 Sonics, where him and Gary Payton always. I don't know. To me, the thing that stood out about that segment of the episodes were George Karl not playing Gary Payton to guard Michael Jordan. I thought that was absolutely ridiculous. You have one of the best defensive players ever and one of the best offensive players ever on the other team. So it just naturally makes sense. Why don't you put him? Why don't you have Gary Payton guarding Michael Jordan earlier in the series? Ross, were you as baffled as I was?
Well, yeah, I was baffled, but I understood George Karl's method. It was more of the, if I put you on Jordan, it's going to be an exhausting night for you guarding Jordan. We're going to lose you offensively, and we can't do that. Although I see his point, I just think at the end of the day, if you take out Michael Jordan, no matter what you get left from Gary Payton offensively, it's worth it. It's at the end of the day, Michael Jordan drives that team. I know there's a triangle offense, and they were just part in these episodes where they talked about how they worked even well without Michael Jordan, but you need Michael Jordan to truly make the triangle offense as potent as possible to be a championship team. And I could see how maybe the first game you have your strategy and you go for it, but you get mopped the first game. I think it's time to put your best defensive player on their best offensive player. It'd be like if they didn't put Kawhi on LeBron. I know it's exhausting to guard LeBron for all those times, but at the end of the day, if you take out the best player, you can have a better shot to win in any sport. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. It was baffling. I didn't know that. Obviously, going into this documentary that was the move George Karl made. But as you can see, as soon as they made the switch, it made it a lot more difficult. They were able to make something that looked like the easiest sweep of all time. They said. I think at the beginning of that part of the episode, it's supposed to be the easiest series of all time in the finals. Made it into a 6-game series, which is the best you could hope for against Michael Jordan. So, yeah, it was baffling, but at the end of the day, I think Jordan would have found a way anyway. Like he said, he was laughing the whole time watching Gary Payton say, I would have been able to stop him. It would have been different. I think Jordan was going to get that championship no matter what.
Ooh,
yeah, but I mean, look, Okelo, think about it. When Gary Payton was not guarding Michael Jordan, when Gary Payton was not guarding Michael Jordan, the Sonics were 1-3. When Gary Payton was guarding Michael Jordan, 2-1. Or they were 0-3 when Gary Payton wasn't guarding Michael Jordan, and when he was, they were 2-1. And also, I mean, when you are on the brink of elimination, you tend to play a little bit more. With a little more urgency. So, I mean, do you think that did Michael Jordan have an issue with Gary Payton? Yes or no?
When those final couple games, I mean, I could definitely see Gary found a way to get under his skin. I mean, Gary Payton is, if not one of the best defensive basketball players in the history of the game, if not one of the greatest defensive point guards in the game. I definitely could feel, because I don't think MJ has played with a guy that could do as much as Gary Payton did. Now, of course, he dealt with like the bad boy Pistons, but that was an era of basketball where hard fouls were allowed. Gary Payton did things differently defensively, and that's what made him, if not one of the best in his career. I think MJ eventually found it out. He'll like Michael Jordan does. He'll play you around. He might get confused a little bit with how you play, but he's going to figure out some way, somehow to do it. And, personally, I even think if Gary had even guarded MJ from point, I think Michael still would have found a way to overcome that, because, after all, no disrespect to Gary Payton, and especially to that great Seattle team and George Karl, because he coached my Nuggets as well. But, MJ could easily find a way to pick apart with you. And even if he had to get to Scottie, Dennis, or Steve Kerr, either way, something's going to go down, and, MJ's going to find a way to beat you at his best.
Yeah, I think, I do think that, Michael Jordan said he had no problem with Gary Payton, and I believe him. Maybe a little bit of trouble, but ultimately, Michael Jordan was the one who ended up with the ring.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah,
and I think what we've learned more about Michael Jordan, is he needs something to motivate him. And I think after he went up 3-0, he needed something to motivate him again. And that was losing 2 games in Seattle. And having the final game on Father's Day truly motivated him as well. So I think he was I think that's what we've learned from Michael Jordan is if Michael Jordan puts his mind to something, regardless of what it is, he can do it. And I think that's what we learned from his baseball career and from, his second three-peat. So, yeah. And next week is the dramatic conclusion where it starts with those 98 conference finals. We'll learn more about that 97 season as well. And maybe more about, the aftermath of his career and, where did the Bulls end up after that. I'm definitely looking forward to it. And, of course, we'll be back on Monday here as well for the last Dance podcast. There you go. See, I was doing something there. All right. Ross and Okelo, thank you so much for coming on with me today to talk Last Dance. Be sure to check out the HTF podcast throughout the summer by subscribing to us wherever you listen to podcasts, especially on Apple Podcasts. And you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Hitting the Field. And you can subscribe to our YouTube channel where we post all of the episodes of all of our podcasts, including the Take Me Out to the podcast, where we're going to create an episode here in a couple of days where we're talking about the Korean baseball organization and see what they're up to. And we're also going to post episodes of the HTF podcast and Hitting the Crew podcast. Hopefully we can get an episode out this week for that. So Ross and Okelo, thank you so much for tuning in, for coming on today. Thank you to the listeners, to all of you for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the flip side.